Hey, it's Matthew Cudmore, and welcome to Story Behind the Stone. Today, we're joined by Charles Sadnick and Bob Brinkman from the Texas Historical Commission. The commission oversees historical programs for Texas, which is a state that has over 260,000 square miles and over 254 counties, and they're managing more than 17,000 official Texas historical markers, which are as large as 2 feet by 3 feet. Join us as we explore this program and the essential mission of the Undertold Marker Program as well, diving into the hidden histories and undertold stories of Texas that are often missing from the historical record, and discussing the vital work of preserving the state's most vulnerable historic cemeteries. Charles and Bob, thanks for joining the show, and to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Hello and welcome to Story Behind the Stone, a show where we talk service, sacrifice, and story, connecting you to the individuals that are changing the way the world remembers in history and veterans commemoration and historical preservation. My name is Matthew Cudmore. So pleased to welcome to the show Bob Brinkman and Charles Sadnick with the Texas Historical Commission. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got a lot of ground to cover. If you could explain just a little bit about what the commission is all about, how it got started, and just the incredible miles of history that you look after every day.
We have a long history here in the United States. Every state basically has a preservation kind of agency or commission. The Texas Historical Commission is the one for the state of Texas. And our mission statement is to protect and preserve the state's historic and prehistoric resources for the use, education, enjoyment, and economic benefit of present and future generations. So that's a lot of stuff. We do have several hundred employees at our agency. A lot of them are out at historic sites. So we have sites, over 40 of them now, I believe, all around the state of Texas. And then we have people in central headquarters here in Austin that are doing all sorts of preservation work as well, education work, all sorts of different things. Here in History Programs Division, which is a division that Bob and I are part of, we work with constituents around the state. We also work with museums and county historical commissions. We'll probably talk a little bit more about those later. Cemetery associations, local governments, state and federal agencies, and all sorts of other parties to basically identify, evaluate, and interpret our historic resources. And the Historical Marker Program is very much an important part of that. And I would say it's one of the programs at our agency that we're best known for.
When it comes to the state of Texas, give us a sense of, how many residents are there, how many visitors, what are they most interested in seeing?
We're a very large state, as you alluded to. I think land size wise, right, we're second largest. And I think population wise, we're also the second largest in the U.S. 254 counties here. And every single one is serious about its history. And so, when people think about the state of Texas, I think, and history, they often think about the Revolutionary period. They think about the Alamo. They think about San Jacinto, which is one of our historic sites, Sam Houston, Davy Crockett, things of that nature. And so we do interpret and mark a lot of these sites that are of statewide or national significance, but we also have a real heavy focus on local and county significance. With our historical markers, we're not just looking at interpreting people that you would know in New York or Canada or somewhere else across the world. We're looking at people that were really important in local history. And so those are a lot of the people we work with. There are a lot of families that come to us and say, hey, we have this ancestor that was a really important person in civil rights for the community, or that was a local leader that changed the direction of the course of the town. And oftentimes we'll be working on those types of stories for our historical markers.
It sounds like an incredible program and really unique kind of for that local level engagement. Bob, I want to bring you into the conversation. If you could just share a little bit more about what your day-to-day looks like. And I know that you have an upcoming deadline, I guess, related to the Undertold Markers Program.
So yeah, Texas historical markers have been around for decades. They put up about 1,000 granite ones around the time of Texas's 100th anniversary of independence from Mexico in 1936. And then there are aluminum ones on the side of the road since the early 60s. And so chances are you've seen one or maybe almost run into one because they're out of almost every driveway by now. But there are about 17,000 in Texas. We do up to 200 new ones a year. And even at that, the state recognized about 20 years ago, we weren't covering all the topics. We were kind of overemphasizing some things and not covering enough of others. So the Undertold program has been around for since 2006, and it's paid for partly with application fees from new markers, and then our friends group raises the rest of the funds for that. And so what we're doing right now this time of year is it's our Undertold application period. From now till November 15th, anybody, professional historian, just a casual observer, anybody can turn in an application. It's 250 words. If you have some history typed up, that's great, but all we need is the 250 words to kind of get the sense of what the topic is, a suggested 2 or 3 sources for where we might find more, and then possibly if you've kind of arranged where that might be placed in the community, and then it could be considered. And what's nice about that is that it's a pretty quick process. It's not too much information to turn in, and 15 of them a year are selected to be cast for free. It comes out of those application fees and that fundraising. And so if we encourage people to just turn in things they think are interesting, and we've learned a lot of things where we thought we knew something, or we had tangentially seen a reference to something, and what got turned in for Undertold really fleshed out the story.
What kinds of markers are being surfaced to this?
The way we score them here in our agency is that we get somebody from different divisions. So background in architecture and archaeology and community heritage, and then in history programs. And we score them separately. And we kind of all come up with the same top 8 or 10 or 12. It's interesting how the same ones kind of rise to the top that we recognize, those are really good ones. And there is different criteria. So our community heritage, they're interested in the visitor experience. So they might think something is a fantastic topic, but it's on private land. And so there's nothing to really see there. And so they score that lower. We might score something as kind of the topic as a hypothetical about that it's so significant. But yeah, again, maybe there's no place to put the marker, and maybe that will come down the line. But one of the first ones we did in the first year, it was 2008. And it was a Cold War missile silo. So it had just turned 50 years or so old around that time. And one of our subsets of markers of things that we mark are for landmarks. So it's for buildings and structures, bridges, different man-made objects. So this was a landmark for the missile silo that is about 10 feet above ground for a covering for a door, and then almost 200 feet below ground for the concrete and the rebar and everything that housed an Atlas missile. So it was the first intercontinental ballistic missile, easy for you to say, that could reach the Soviet Union from different places in the US. They created a dozen of these around different strategic sites in the US. So there were 12 around Abilene, Texas. This was one of those. And the person who had acquired it, he came to us. He says, I've done all this history, and these sites were not necessarily even noticed as they were being built in the 60s because they were sort of secretive. And then they had been given back to the landowner or whoever else, but he acquired that one and was interested in telling the history and making it accessible to people. So it's something that people can tour now. We did some educational workshops there about Texas and the Cold War to actually do them on that site. But it's a place where they would launch that missile. There was a control room. I understand there were like young cadets from the airbase poised there on like a 24-hour shift, and there was a red button and there was a phone. And if the phone rang, you said, yes, sir, and hit the button. And those missiles would be in Russia in 30 minutes. A scary time and highly significant. And a little bit off the road, but the turnoff is right there. And I think you can kind of see the top of it from there. But yeah, the structure is still underground. It's still something that you wouldn't notice as you drive along the road without this marker saying, hey, something actually globally important happened here. But here's the local connection to it to really pin down a site.
Charles, have you seen, in your local area, have you seen some markers pop up that were unexpected for you?
You kind of mentioned, is it okay to pick favorites? Like as if you can't pick your favorite kid, but I do have a favorite. And it's a favorite because it's one I submitted when we first had when we had the very first cycle, and it was a topic that was important to me, which is Korean-Texans. And we didn't have a marker marking Korean-Texans, and I'm half Korean. And so the marker talked a lot about the kind of immigration patterns and how they came over. A lot of it had to do with military history. That's how I ended up here. My dad was in the U.S. Army, and met my mother when he was stationed in Korea, and then was sent to Fort Bliss in El Paso, and that's where I was born and raised. So that was an important marker to me. And we put it up in Dallas, Texas, in this kind of shopping district, kind of their little Koreatown area. And I still shoot up there quite often and get some good food. And every time I go around the circle, and sometimes I take a snapshot, put it on LinkedIn or something, say, hey, look, check out what we got going on here. So yeah, I do have a favorite. All the other ones are pretty good too. That ICBM one, maybe that story beats this one, but but yeah, that's definitely one that I'm very proud of.
I'm curious about actually is just the physical size that you're working with and how you condense and collapse a complex story like that into what kind of space are we talking about here?
A little bit over 2 feet times 3 feet wide, so like 280 words. You're right. Sometimes we scratch the surface of name dropping the key terms and things like that, but we're excited by that because like the typical thing for historical topics to kind of consider things is usually 50 years, especially for buildings, but even we do have one for 30 years for events, but 10 years for individuals after they're deceased. And so it gets tricky with things that are 50 or 30 years old. Well, maybe everybody involved is still alive and you can't really tell their story because their story is not done yet. But yeah, we like the challenge of keep moving that mark forward. And part of these undertolds are a county may have been really active with markers in the 60s or the 80s, and they kind of stopped and they tell all their 1800 stories, but there's no 1900 stories. And now there's World War I and World War II and Art Deco architecture and even ranch style 50s architecture to talk about that might be significant. And so not only the 15 undertolds chosen each year, and we usually get something between 60 and 100 applications for that, but even the regular applications we get in the other times of the year are starting to reflect that kind of first time told in a county or in a region topics where they're thinking about things they haven't talked about yet.
When it comes to folks that are submitting, I'm imagining there's a letter in the mail or maybe it's an email. What are you hearing back from them when they hear that their marker has been accepted?
They're usually very appreciative. The undertolds, it's 15-20% are selected. We have a regular application in the spring where if all the materials are there and it qualifies, that's a lot higher acceptance rate. And that means that they have identified the funding source to pay for the marker. And so it's descendants or it's a community group or some county governments give their county historical commission enough money to work on a few projects each year, including markers or restoring cemeteries or publications. And so they'll prioritize what are their important stories to tell because maybe they get to do only one a year or one every 2 or 3 years.
I think what's really nice is that with the cost of everything rising, including of metal, right? For our metal markers, the regular markers are pretty expensive, and so to be told that, hey, first of all, the story that you've uncovered, oftentimes connected to your family or something that was just really important to you, not only are you being honored with an official Texas historical marker, but we've got it. We'll pay for it, and sometimes what's really cool is that we'll engage students or we'll engage researchers. And so Bob mentioned that the application form is very short. All you have to do is submit 250 words max, is that's what we're asking for. And then the research happens at that point after it's selected. And we have partnerships with different institutions around here that have public history programs, or the people that submit the applications themselves may want to do the historical research. And so we'll work with them and they'll develop that kind of narrative and the research. We'll ask them questions. We'll let them know what kind of information we want. We'll have them sometimes confirm information and then really build the story that we use to then write the inscription.
Say I'm going to Dallas or Houston. How do I find these markers beyond kind of stumbling upon them?
On our website, we have an inventory of all the resources that we keep track of. So historical markers, National Register listings, cemeteries, surveyed properties where we've kind of done an initial drive-by and a little index card of information, 40 years ago or 10 years ago to kind of get a first pass of things. That's on our website, Texas Historical Commission, called the Atlas. And so from there at your desktop, you can search all sorts of ways, geographically or by topic or by keyword, and select the kind of resources you want. We also have a mobile app for phones now called Texas History Navigator. There it is. Charles has it.
For those of you who are watching my video, you'll see a bunch of dots here. So all those gray dots, those are historical markers. That's the city of Austin, where we are right now. But yeah, the Texas Navigator app is something that we put out there last year, I think, and we're really pushing right now. And you can find all our historic resources, the historical markers, but also museums and our historic sites and all sorts of stuff on there. So in Texas, it's probably this way all around the country. I hear this all the time. People will come up to us and say they love the historical markers. They grew up stopping by the road and reading the markers as they went across the state on a trip, and that's just a really common story here in Texas. And we have the atlas primarily for professionals, but anyone can use that. And then we have the app now that people can use so that they can aim for certain markers rather than just kind of bumping into them as they're driving along.
It's a fantastic resource that you're providing. I mean, not just in terms of the physical interpretation, but the digital as well. Where do you kind of see the future of the marker program going? It's seen evolution, from the centennial markers to aluminum. What does it look like in 20 or 30 years?
We'll have to repaint some faded ones because some of them have been up there a while. And we have instructions for that on the website too. Anybody can volunteer and repaint them, and we would appreciate that because we can't get to all 17,000 in a given year.
I think the use of technology is interesting, right? Possibly with some of these. And I would say we're taking baby steps into it, but we've looked at things like we were talking this morning, Bob and I, about the use of QR codes to provide further information about some topics. We're known for this very specific design and type of markers, but there are all sorts of other markers, historical markers that we created that have a lot more use of color, different types of paneling, and we'll do different types of interpretation at different sites that are apart from the historical marker program. So you can see the technology developing there too. That's really neat. And then Bob, I mean, Matthew, you mentioned the centennial markers, but as we're looking forward, we're also kind of looking back because our bicentennial of Texas independence is coming up in 2036. I'm looking at what year it is, and 11 years is not a lot of time. So we're kind of looking towards the centennials as we're looking to the future.
The state and federal funding for 1936 paid for not only an exhibition grounds in Dallas at the State Fair, which is still there, and now it's like one of the best collections of Art Deco architecture in the country. It's a national historic landmark because most of those buildings and that whole campus is still intact from the 30s. But also to put these markers all out on the highways. Up to that point, Texas and other places in general would mark grave sites. They would mark a few kind of substantial homes. There might be a plaque at Mount Vernon for George Washington, and kind of working their way down from the national level down to local. But the idea was to put one along all the roads in almost every county. 254 counties. They got as far as marking all but 4 of them. I don't know if they had something against those counties or they ran out of time or money. There's a pink granite block in almost every county that says this is the name of the county, when it was created, who it's named for, and some good basic information. And then some gray granite markers kind of shoulder high with 1 to 2 or 3 sentences about this was a battle site, this was somebody's homestead, and really just a variety of topics. They weren't all 1836 Texas Revolutionary topics. They were all through the 1800s, the cattle drive, and even an oil strike from 1930, which at that point was 6 years old, but is now also, we still recognize that as significant.
Have you had to go back and make any adjustments or amendments to markers?
We absolutely have had to. So that's really interesting. We a few years ago in our administrative code, we wrote in a new rule that had to do with factual errors on our markers. And so once again, anyone can bring that forward if they see some sort of error on one of our markers. They can submit a request to have us take a look at that. They need to provide kind of the background research and evidence, and that goes to our agency to take a look at and approve the correction or not. And if it's something that we identify, yeah, you're right here, you've made the we're the ones who made that error. Or typically what happens, right, is that 50 years later we look back and I'm like, oh, we have more information now. that was more folklore than actual truth, or the truth was something totally different. Then we'll go and pay for the replacement for that marker if we have the funding for it. So, or we'll put like a supplemental plate by the marker and say, hey, yeah, this is all accurate, but the birth date was actually this, or the name was actually spelled this way. So that's how we address a lot of the issues with some of our older markers.
How are you monitoring the most popular spots?
When we place the markers, it's really important for us for people to be able to see them and get information, to get a lot of the public to see them. Bob, what kind of things do you consider when we're talking about location of these markers?
There's definitely consideration and a push and pull there of the accurate site versus the one people can access. Like, is it a little bit removed? And then we refer to it was along this river bank that's, visible down on the trees there, but you can't get there. So is that the ferry crossing, or do you mark the literal site? Because that's going to become a neighborhood and you really want to protect, the sensitivity of a particular site. And we do write all of our markers that aren't about a cemetery or about a building, where we can say this building is Art Deco or this cemetery is 1 acre. If it's any kind of subject, we write in general terms because we know it might move around. Like, this is a rural area today, but that's going to be a neighborhood in 5 or 10 years. And so if it's a significant individual or this was their homestead, we'll just say they were along Elm Creek. And as long as Elm Creek is there, and even when it gets channelized, there's still Elm Creek, and that's something to understand. But we won't say they were right here, because right here might not be the same place in 10 years.
How does the marker program kind of fit into the overall remit of your department, Charles?
We've got 6 or 7 different programs in this division, and they all work with each other so much. We've got a national register program that runs through all the states. Work the National Register program at the state level to the federal level, and that runs through our division. Well, we'll consult each other in different programs to talk about the significance of different properties and people. We mentioned the cemetery program. So to get a cemetery marker, you first have to get a historic Texas cemetery designation. That's a requirement to get that marker, because we want to make sure that your cemetery is recorded in deed records at the county level, which is what that designation does. And that'll alert present and future landowners that there's a cemetery here. So be careful as you're doing construction. We have a county historical commission outreach program, which works with the marker program as well. So while the Undertold program can be submitted by any individual, the regular marker cycle, the applications must come in through their county historical commissions. They're the ones who are kind of vetting the research, working with sponsors, giving their approval before it gets sent on to us. So we work very closely. Those two programs work very closely with each other as well. So they all jive together, and not just in our division, but then we'll work with the Division of Architecture as well. They're the ones that are reviewing the applications for structures and buildings, to say, hey, this one has enough integrity, this one maybe doesn't and shouldn't get this marker. So we have to work all across the agency to make sure that we're achieving our goals and meeting our mission.
I understand you have 17,000 markers in the state, and about 1,500 of those are cemeteries. Are they sprinkled all over? Are there concentrations? And since it's a cemetery show, how can visitors make the most of their time and get a sense of like a representative cemetery in Texas that's historic?
Cemetery markers have to be at the cemetery, or at least close enough that you can see it in the grove of trees in the field. And even there, they need to give us a waiver saying, why can it not be like at the gate or in there? We've got some landowners that are friendlier than others to the 1 acre cemetery that's within their field. And so we don't want to antagonize anybody, and maybe now's not the right time. Again, we'll try to be clever the way we word the marker, that it works here on the road and it also works if you're standing there in describing it. We also want the language on the marker to make sense when you're standing there and not waste your time, but also to make sense when you're reading it remotely. So if somebody up in Amarillo is reading about, this coastal cemetery, and somebody's standing on the coast and say, well, I can see it's on the coast. But we're like, yeah, but they're reading it remotely, and they're trying to understand if it has historic trees, or if the layout is significant, or there was a historic school or church associated with it on the other acre, and that's why it's shaped the way it is. And so we try to describe that in certain ways. But sometimes the description that we want to put is not a good idea. So there's some, between Austin and Houston, there's a lot of historically German and Czech towns, and some of them will have the German or Czech language or Polish language markers for the gravestones. And there's some that had just elaborate metal work from the 1880s or 1890s that were simulated arbors and trees and ivy and vines in metal around these graves. And we thought, well, we need to describe that on the marker because they're so unique. But then we thought that's a terrible idea, because then we're telling people with nefarious reasons, hey, here's where you can come get some good stuff. And so it's kind of strange that we describe it in like we're missing the point of, hey, this is the thing you should see, but we can't give it away on the marker. If you're there, if that's your family and you're in that community, why that one's important.
So the descriptions are sometimes a little bit more basic, right? Like vertical stones, wooden of the world memorials, veterans from the Civil War and World War I are buried here. And so some of that language is relative. I mean, it's going to switch between cemeteries, but stays relatively the same. And what you see a lot of that's different is the context behind how the cemetery was founded, what the community was, or the school, or the church, or whatever that led to this, or the family. There's a lot of family cemeteries as well. And so we'll give a lot of that information. We'll give information about who deeded the land, and what are the kind of major families that are represented here. And sometimes a lot of that information is more expanded if it's on a larger marker. A lot of times we suggest the smaller marker for cemeteries, not only because we can't go into that level of detail, but also because we want you to spend the money on other things to help protect that cemetery. We're thinking about kind of a whole preservation plan. You may need some fencing, you may need some work done to help take care of the landscaping. You may need to put money into developing out your nonprofit that takes care of the cemetery as well. And not everything needs to go towards this marker that costs thousands of dollars.
I want to turn the lens to the future, to 2026. We're looking toward your regular cycle for markers. And of course, you have the upcoming deadline. What else is going on in 2026?
The regular period is March 1st to May 15th. So it's a longer application window. For that, people need to have things more developed. So they've got to have owner permission of where it's going to go. They've got to have the money to pay for it, to do the foundry cost of the marker. And we need at least a 5-page double-spaced narrative cited at least as well as your high school term paper. And most people haven't written anything since their high school term paper. So we have lots of helps on our website about this is how we would do it if it was a community, or if it was an individual, or if it was a World War II story. And we have some sample things. And as if 254 counties wasn't enough, we created the fake Post Oak County to be number 255 so that these histories live in that fictional county, so that we weren't taking stories from any real stories.
By the way, all those narratives that Bob's talking about, we have those for a lot of the markers, especially the markers that have been written over the last 15 years. We have all these histories behind these markers, and you can always email staff to ask for that. Some of this is available online, Bob, that you can also grab. So we've got these histories here ourselves, and so we got that coming up. The other big thing with the agency, I would say, is our Real Places Conference. And so this is the Historic Preservation Conference in Texas. It draws people from all different fields, all different businesses. They come in and go to workshops, panels. It's over 3 days, April 8th through 10th. So registration's not up yet, but it usually comes up in about 15 to 30 days. So it's coming up soon. It's put on by our agency and the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. We have incredible speakers that come, and it's a really good chance to connect with other people. We have about 1,000 attendees that come every year, and also to connect with staff, learn more about historic preservation principles, and also what the THC is doing in Texas. And that's something that's all hands on deck with our staff that we really support and we're really passionate about.
How can people follow what you're working on and what's keeping you busy?
Easiest way to find us is to just search for Texas Historical Commission Undertold Markers. And so if you have an interesting story that you want to submit, or you just kind of want to see more about what we do, just do the Google search will be the first thing that pops up. If you're interested in supporting the program financially, because as Bob mentioned, we pay for these markers through application fees from the normal markers, but then also through fundraising. You can go to thcfriends.org, which is the nonprofit that raises money for agency initiatives that we can't fund on our own. So that's a really good place to go to as well. And I would say that we've got all sorts of really cool like social media stuff going on. We have Facebook presence, we have Instagram presence. We have this really cool webinar program for museums that hits all sorts of interesting kind of topics that they can find by looking up museums and the Texas Historical Commission. We have a newsletter for historical markers that goes up periodically that gives you an interesting story about one of the markers. You can sign up for that through our website. We've got also a really good museum services newsletter. And since this is cemeteries, maybe you'll like this, Matthew. The name of our cemetery newsletter is Grave Concerns. So we're very proud of that title there. That's one that talks about the various activities that are going on in our preservation program for cemeteries throughout the state of Texas. And we launched that last year. So that's a relatively new newsletter for us.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, share more about the program. Again, the deadline, November 15th, to get your submissions in. Thanks so much for tuning in. Story Behind the Stone is available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Wreaths Across America radio network, on iHeartRadio, Audacity, and TuneIn. Just search for Wreath. We air every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Wreaths Across Radio network. Thank you for tuning in.